Right. Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. This is Blake out of North Carolina. I do a lot of dev stuff as well. So just spent 4 weeks on the road. So huge shout out to Jamie for helping to put this together. We saw on the CMX Connect side, we put on a lot of events, virtual events, some in-person events from around the world. We'll put a link in the chat. There's always room to connect and grow. A lot of times it's the Spider-Man meme. Wait, there's other people like me out there. Yes, there's other community professionals like you out there, whether they're doing DevRel, dev advocacy, a lot of different flavors to this life of community that somehow we've all found ourselves in one way or the other, right? So it's great that we're connecting here today. So CMX Connect is put on by CMX. They got a great Slack, great community of similar professionals. They got a DevRel channel, all that great stuff. So lots more exciting stuff always coming up on our side. And I just say before handing it over to Jamie today, we will be doing a book giveaway. There'll be a cool post-event survey to take. On the Q&A at the very end, we'll be bringing you up to stage. If you don't want to be on video, you can just turn on your audio. We're definitely cool with that as well. So audio, video, you'll come up the stage. You're not just going to have you in the chat, but really for me and Jamie, we saw this DevRel book. This book is going to be incredible, very foundational. There's so many people new in the DevRel space, not knowing like what the North Star is. There's so many unknowns. So having a book like this is going to be one that's going to be right to your left. So when you shift left, this book is going to be right there as your constant companion, North Star guide, and best friend. And so we knew we had to have the authors. So really great, exciting to have this event for you today. This is Blake, and I'll turn it over to the legendary, the one and only Jamie Johnson out of Scotland.
Well, I don't hear any applause, but that's okay. Thank you, Blake. Thank you so much. Yes, I'll take it. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's great to be here again, talking about another important book in the community canon, focused this time more on our developer audience. So newish to me. I've tended to be more in the other side, in brand community. So I read through the book, but still so much great insight to take from it, and lots of crossover, of course, with existing community frameworks. So just going to introduce now to you the two authors of the book. So Carolyn, who, how do you say your surname? I never asked.
Lewko,
Carolyn Lewko. Yeah, so first book you've authored?
First serious published book, yes.
Right.
Some little ones that only half count.
Well, a great book to start seriously with, for sure. Yeah, and she loves all things DevRel, and is helping lots of companies be successful with DevRel. And we've also got James Parton. So hello, James.
Hi.
And James also co-author of this book, and he's run DevRel programs for O2 and Telefonica, and also been involved with Twilio European Business for its first 5 years. So lots of credentials to go into the book. And yeah, we're going to spend half an hour asking some questions, getting to understand some of the frameworks, really, actionable things in there. So we'll touch on some of those. Half an hour isn't very long. So we really want to give time to those that are here to ask some questions as well. So please use the Q&A tab to ask your questions. Blake will field those. And we would love to get you up on the stage to ask your question at the end, but you don't have to. And you can come up and just use your audio if you're not presentable. That's all good too. So let's get into it. And of course, yeah, for those that are here, we are going to raffle a couple of books as well. So please do stick around to the end, and we will give you that opportunity. All right, so where do we start? Well, lots of places that we could start, but it really feels like, for me personally, reading the book, there's so much to DevRel that I wasn't aware of. I didn't skip to the community chapter, which is chapter 25. I read all the way through in the order, but of course you talk about community all the way through. So it felt, though, that that was an important place to start, especially for our CMX audience, and all the various frameworks that we've talked about in our previous events. And CMX has the spaces model. So there's lots of frameworks that exist. So I want to start very broadly and really talk about, what's the difference in terms of a developer community or community itself from a DevRel program. Is DevRel more than just community management? And what comes first? Is it the community or is it the DevRel program? Where do we start?
Well, I'll field that question. Thanks, Jamie. And it definitely starts, first and foremost, when we think about developer relations, it's about developers. So it's about developers as a route to market. So that's really where we need to think about what that difference is. And at the same time, developers are different. So, if somebody's going to come into this developer relations space, we need to understand who those developers are, and what the foundation is. So, communities don't form communities need a reason to form. And in this case, it's because companies have tools and products for developers. And these tend to be things like APIs and SDKs and HDKs. And in order for those products to be successful with this audience we call developers, we need to put a developer program around that. And so we often find in this space that developer program and developer communities are called the same thing. And they are and they aren't. So what we like to say is, when we talk about our developer program and our users and our audience, if we take the philosophy that it's a community, that means we're in service to these people that we're working with, and that's very important. But at the same time, when we take a look at what is community management, that's actually a subset of what a developer program is. A developer program needs to include a lot of different things, which is a lot of what we talk about in the book.
Right. So we're really saying that community is one small part of everything that needs to go into a DevRel program.
From a management perspective, it is.
Right.
From a philosophy, yes, we're working with a community. From a management perspective, it's a subset.
Okay. And in terms of these, like you say, the communities don't just exist on their own, they kind of exist for a reason. But one of the things that is maybe slightly different for a developer audience, or I was curious to understand, is, where are the communities happening? Obviously, there are some existing platforms where they might be, whether it's Reddit, Slack or other places. Have you seen any trends around, whether there's more communities in those places, or are companies building their own brand communities more and more at this point?
That comes back to a question too. So what's the purpose of these platforms? Is it a place where they come and find answers to their questions so they can more readily use these products? Those tend to be more forum-based communities, and they need a place where it's easy for developers to go in and find answers to their questions. And certainly we're finding a lot of programs, sort of jumped onto the Slack bandwagon to use it, but Slack isn't a great place to go and find answers that somebody had a while back. So we are seeing more people move towards things like Discord to use for their developer programs, and that's where the companies themselves, are providing the tools for these communities to form. But communities form on their own as well, outside of what a company will provide, as we know. And Stack Overflow is certainly a place where that happens. Although, because the technology space and the developer space is so broad, Stack doesn't support it all very well if something is really niche. For instance, where we're finding community forming on its own is YouTube, especially when it comes to things like artificial intelligence and machine learning. That's a great space for that. And there's different conversations that are happening in subreddits and things like that, but there's certainly no sort of one answer for where communities are.
Yeah, and to build on Carolyn's point, I think the reality is obviously developers are members of multiple communities at the same time, right? So, if they're looking for specific support or roadmaps or technical documentation, they're going to be connecting directly with the provider of those technologies, typically through their Discord, as Carolyn's kind of mentioned, or their docs on their website. But equally, if they're looking for peer support, peer-to-peer education, or a kind of non-affiliated answer to a question, they might go to Stack Overflow or Reddit. And obviously, the most obvious trend in the last 18 months has been the disruption to the physical coming together of communities, and the disruption around meetup groups and the kind of conference circuit, which traditionally has been the kind of the main channel for developer advocacy. So we've seen a big switch away from that, obviously, due to the pandemic.
Yeah. All right. Well, so, I mean, one of the things obviously that is unique to these communities is the audience, as you say, and you spend some time in the book, talking about that. And so who are these people? And one of the things that I wanted to share was your developer truisms. Now, there's a lot in here, but let me just bring it up on the screen. There we go. I think we can see that. And so, yes, you talk about this, I made that. So this is kind of this sort of North Star, I guess, right, for the program is, helping these developers reach that point of when they have made something that we celebrate it and we can share it. So you have that kind of central in here. But I wondered, out of these other points here, if there were any that were kind of top of mind or sort of a priority or a something that is very important to this audience. And self-learning, I wondered about, just in fact of, there's now so many tools and so many places to go and get information. And of course, that is what a lot of what a DevRel program is trying to do, is to try and help them learn the tools and do it as easily as possible. So is that an area that's kind of really important when we think about the developer audience? Like, where would you start out of these truisms?
Yeah, I would say self-learning, understanding that that's where developers learn is very important, because it really drives all of the different developer learning and developer education that you need to put around that. And as you said, there's so much technology right now, and there's so many tools for developers that they can't possibly know it all. And so, we always joke when we talk to a company and we tell them, who's your target audience? It's developers. And that's just not realistic for a successful program, because there just is so much diversity. So when you think about developers, well, where do they learn? Many of them, come out of comp sci school or some of the different coding schools that are around, but they only learn a very, very small subset of coding and programming and all the different tools that are out there. So where do they learn? They have to learn on their own. They have to learn during office hours, or they have to learn after they're finished work. And so it's incumbent on developer programs to provide the resources for developers to learn their program. You can't assume they can just pick it up. So, that speaks to things like documentation and good tutorials and things like that are really important to include.
Yeah.
And I guess that, it hand in hand, that goes with the learn by doing. You could read something, but for a developer, they really have to get in there and get it started and try and, build something to their, what we call the first hello world, which is just the basic program that they've written that proves that something works. And again, how do they learn to do that? You have to make sure that you've got the proper tools or, the proper education in place for them.
Right. And I also like, the like facts, not marketing. And I think this is true, or it feels like it's true of most communities, where community managers get stuck in the middle a little bit, where, they're trying to communicate directly with an audience versus perhaps the organization at a higher level or kind of a brand level. And I like the way that you talked about this. And actually, it made me realize that using a developer as a particular use case for that really kind of helps. It's maybe not true for all community managers. They're not usually all building for developers necessarily, but there's something very compelling about that in terms of like, they want the facts and they don't want the fluff. But actually, that's kind of true of most people, it feels like. Is there anyone that likes the fluff?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that often is told so much about developers. Developers don't like marketing, but who really likes marketing when it's all fluffy and you can't understand it? But certainly for developers, we often do what we call friction logging, and we'll go to somebody's site and try and understand what's happening. And if they're talking about, our tool is the best thing that's going to help empower you to do what, and what can I do with it? You need to be very clear and very factual about what it is that you've got and what a developer can actually do with it before you get into all the fluffy puffy stuff.
And I think just going back to that point around marketing, you're absolutely right. No one likes to be marketed to, really, do we? I think we all skip ads at every opportunity. I think that also applies to sales. I think also that there's some kind of dangerous cliches that, sales and developers don't mix, marketing and developers don't mix. And I say it's dangerous because I think it does a disservice to huge percentages of the work that DevRel programs need to do to be successful. Because, if you've got an antiquated view of what sales is, you don't want to be associated with it. But if you're up to speed with modern sales, if you're a developer advocate standing up on stage at a meetup talking about your API or your product, you are selling. You can't get away from that. You can dress it up as something else if you want to, but the reality is you're there because you've been paid by your employer to go drive registrations or sign-ups to your product, right? So, I think we all understand that there's a difference in the execution of sales and marketing with developers, but I don't think it's helpful to drive a wedge between the functional teams of sales and marketing and developer relations, because you have to have that kind of cross-organization relationship to be successful.
Yeah.
You're here.
All right. And so, okay, we talked a little bit about the audience, and you've also said, right, that, community is a big part of DevRel. So I wanted to also share your kind of core diagram, as it were, around the developer relations objectives or the framework. So let me just bring this up. This is obviously kind of getting into the meat of how you structure the book in terms of covering each of these areas off. So I wondered if you could just briefly touch on what each of these areas are and how this is constructed and why it's constructed this way.
Yeah, shall I say that one? Yeah, I mean, so really this framework was born from from two simple questions, really. I mean, number one, if you don't work in developer relations, it's mysterious. People don't understand what you mean by it. So, this was our attempt to try to describe it in an understandable way and show the kind of relationships between the functional areas. And I'll explain those in a second. And then the second one is, like, honestly, if you talk to anyone in DevRel, you're going to get mixed opinions of what developer relations is, and that's going to be based on the kind of product you sell or the role that you perform or the company you work in. So, we're not putting this up here as the definitive statement on what developer relations is, but we kind of call it like a conversation starter. And actually, in the development of the book, we shared an early version of this with our newsletter mailing list, and we got great feedback, and we actually changed it pretty significantly based on that feedback. So, we're not claiming this is the definitive statement by any sense of the imagination. But anyway, in terms of the functional areas, developer marketing, and this overlays to another framework we might look at in a second, which is the developer journey. But developer marketing really encompasses everything you're doing to build awareness of both your brand and also your products that you're offering to developers. So that's obviously everything from your website, your paid advertising, your SEO, your sponsorships of meetups, all of the things that you're putting out there in the world to drive awareness and drive traffic back to you. Developer education, we've kind of touched on to some degree. This is all of the work you're doing around your docs and your content marketing, and your kind of case studies to inspire developers on how they might use your technology and to give them examples of how people have been successful using your technologies. And to the right hand side, you've got developer success, and this kind of ties back to somewhat to my my previous comment about giving credit to the full spectrum of what developer relations covers, because the job isn't done at the point that someone like gets an API key and sends their first couple of JSON queries. It's really taking them through their entire journey with your product and continuing to support them, to nurture them, to inspire them, to make sure they continue to be successful. Because a lot, but not all developer products typically are based on a usage model. So really, you've got that commercial imperative that you continue to drive both the usage of the product, but maybe cross-sell additional products that you might offer, and really, continue to nurture that relationship. And then in the center of everything is the developer experience. So, this is the product that you're offering. It's the experience of signing up and using it, getting to that hello world that Carolyn mentioned, the ease of integration with other, technologies in your stack, really encompasses the actual kind of product experience. And then where community comes in, which we've kind of touched on already, obviously this is kind of like designed to look like a stylized tree. So the community, really, we're trying to show two things there. Number one, your company doesn't own the community, and I think that's a really important point. We've already used the phrase "in service of the community," and I think it's history shows it's very easy for developer programs to lose their community by doing dumb things. So we don't ever say that the community is owned by the company. More that it's, the tree needs its roots, its trunk, to actually survive and to flourish and to feed itself, right? So, the analogy of the trunk is deliberately used as without the trunk, the tree dies.
And who's there to hear it fall? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Lovely. Yeah, no, that's great. So you got this framework, and as you say, it's not necessarily the be all and end all, but it helps create that structure. And then for the book, you're going through all of these areas. Now, I wasn't gonna step through all of those, but you mentioned there the developer journey map, and it does feel like, obviously, I mean, there's a lot in there. So don't get overawed, everyone, when I put this up on the screen. Let me just get it here.
Yeah, this one's a complicated one.
I was going to blank some of it out and and then unhide it as we went along, but I
would say at first glance maybe it looks complicated, but it really isn't. Once you understand what it is, it just really helps you focus and figure out what your program needs. Yeah,
absolutely. So this does kind of have that, crossover with the previous one that you just showed. But essentially what we try to do here is describe the distinct stages the developer moves through as they interact with your company and your product. So that obviously starts at discovery, which is where that marketing functional area comes in. Then they're going to start evaluating you. They're going to start learning how to use your technologies. They're going to build something with you that might be like a hello world or an MVP or something. And then they're going to obviously adopt and scale. Hopefully, that's obviously the end goal. As I said, it doesn't stop at adoption. It scale, overlaps with that, that nurturing and customer developer success piece. And it's also worth stating that this isn't necessarily a linear process, right? Or is it necessarily a time-bound kind of process? So you could drop straight in, evaluate or learn if you've already got some kind of familiarity with the company. And equally, you could go through these stages in minutes. If you do a good job with your developer experience and it's frictionless, you could be writing your first API pull requests or whatever, within minutes, rather than, this doesn't imply days, months, years, right? At each stage, we've kind of highlighted the goal of the developer, and then we've tried to pose some key questions that you need to answer as the developer relations program to allow the developer to move on to the next stage. And then the boxes below just give you some examples. Again, it's not comprehensive, but gives you some examples of the key touch points that the developer has at each one of the stages in the journey. So these are the kinds of things you should be thinking about optimizing and improving and testing and, checking for friction to make sure that the developer, discovers you and scales with you as quickly and as seamlessly as possible. So moves, left to right as fast as possible. Is that a fair summary of that, Carolyn? Is there anything you want to kind of...
Yeah, and I would just add, from any kind of customer journey map you're doing and looking at sort of communities as well, it's always important to look at it from your user, your customer, your audience perspective. And that's very much what this does. And that's very important.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, because I think if you look at it from your company's perspective, you're missing, the kind of the needs of your user, right? And what things you need to be solving for them to allow them to progress.
Yeah. And I think it also highlights, it did for me, especially because this dotted line in here of kind of the developer experience, obviously a very core part. And this is the part that you really need to make sure is working really well for your audience. But just seeing the whole thing, though, I think for my experience of community management and maybe for others, we wouldn't necessarily be expected to be responsible necessarily for all these areas, especially, all of the digital estate and all these different touch points. And I wondered, for DevRel leaders, is it normal that they would have all of that responsibility, or is it partly that they need to, make the relationships with those other teams that are responsible for those things, or where does that lie? Is it that a DevRel leader is created and they do have responsibility for all these things? What's been your experience there?
I have to say, by the way, I love it that you're holding the book at the same time while you're...
Yeah, I'm trying to find the quotes.
This is great. But it depends on the size of the company and the product. We see startups that have somebody who leads, marketing, developer relations, and they look after all of this. They might not actually look after building the product itself and the use or experience within the product, but they definitely look after all of it. When you have really big companies and multiple products, you could have many people doing all of that for, 5 different products. And then you'll have a marketing department that you need to work with. You've got somebody who's doing the education pieces that you need to work with, and you've got somebody who's doing the sales and sort of the DevOps, the support piece that needs to work. So it really varies.
I'm gonna go. I'll try not to go on a rant, but this is like a personal. This is a passion area for me. I mean, I would say the DevRel leader has to have responsibility for the developer end-to-end experience, because who else in the organization is better placed to have that? It would be very weird to me if someone else in the organization felt they were better positioned to have a view on the end-to-end developer experience outside of the DevRel team. I mean, you're absolutely right. That doesn't always equal that they have control over everything. They have to be maybe good matrix managers and build relations inside the organizations. But I think in terms of oversight, it's vital that they have that seat at the table in terms of dictating what that should look like. And I think we've had some really nice feedback just in the last kind of 24 hours. I've got to give a shout out to Tessa Creasel, I think is Director of Advocacy at Lacework, who said that this framework has given her the terminology to start having those internal conversations, to kind of paint this in a way that people can, people outside the DevRel community can understand and start to see how it kind of all hangs together. And I think another reason why I'd always push for the DevRel leader to control it or have authority is not just the day-to-day ramifications of the decisions that's made. I think another big reason that we wanted to write the book is we want to get more recognition for DevRel as a profession and get more influence for DevRel inside organizations, right? So, rather than it traditionally being rolled up underneath marketing or engineering, we're very strongly advocating for DevRel to be a standalone, equal organization. So if you don't have control, even if you don't control all the pieces today, you should be positioning yourself as the authority inside the organization to set you up for that opportunity further down the line. So I think that's really important when you think about career progression, professional recognition, and all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, and of course, as you say, it depends entirely on the company, and similarly for other communities, they have a dedicated community org, but more often than not, that community team sits within another department, and they have to do that matrix idea. And having the framework in the book helps no end to go, look, this is how it should be, or this is the territory we should be covering. I was wondering, so we showed the previous framework where we had community as kind of the trunk. It's not specifically on here, but obviously there's all kinds of community elements that are there. I wondered, in terms of a DevRel team, because we've talked about a DevRel leader, are DevRel teams made up of people that are doing very discrete roles when they start to mature? Like, what does a more mature setup look like?
As we've seen communities, developer programs grow, if we go back to our tree diagram, we very much see people fitting into those different components. So there'll be that outreach group, and within developer marketing to help find that outreach and make sure those use cases and case studies are happening in those sort of words. A lot of content development in there, and developer education is really coming up as a big area, and often we've seen in some organizations developer education really is the developer program, because they're a big company and they're well known, they don't need as much developer marketing, everybody knows about them, but they need to provide those educational resources. So they're busy, whether they're writing the documentation or putting a tutorial together or doing something on a Twitch channel. There's a whole range of things around dev ed.
I think Stripe is a good example of that, right? Documentation led, developer experience led, rather than marketing advocacy led.
Which company?
Stripe,
Google for sure, and even Slack. When you get to some of those larger companies. When we see community coming in at different places. Like, I've got some startup companies I'm working with that they're a developer first company, which means their product is focused for developers, and they innately knew from the beginning that they needed a way to engage community. And one of their first hires coming up is going to be a community manager to support community contributing to their product.
I was going to ask, how many have a dedicated community manager, as a discrete function within the DevRel setup?
You actually don't see a lot of community managers. We tend to see, if there's going to be a role that we see a lot of, it's probably a developer advocate, which seems to be the more common term now than developer evangelist is. And they tend to do a lot of those things. Sometimes they're writing, and sometimes they're out at events, and sometimes they're, supporting that community grow wherever, being where that community is.
And you talked there about the importance of the documentation and the quality of that material, right? So that people are able to navigate your product and get the help and things they need. Any sort of tips around making sure that gets the treatment it needs? I mean, you mentioned there that you do get people that are specifically on that role, right? Maybe more technical writers and things like that. Is that an easier place to ensure that it gets the treatment it needs?
Don't we wish?
I've got a knowledge management background, a bit of a content background, and yeah, it's just there's so much work involved there. And obviously, as tools are iterating and changing all the time, trying to manage that, and maybe you are getting crowdsourcing contributions to documentation and things. It just feels like that's such like a heavy sort of industry for the team.
It's a heavy role. It's an important role. It's if you don't have your documentation in place, you really aren't going to have a successful company and a successful product. You can put all the community around it, but you still really need that. And one of our rants and some of the folks that we work with is the automated creation of documentation, which tends to be out of order, missing a lot of key points, or we see the folks that actually are the product developers, building the documentation alongside the product build. And, we really see that as a big fail most of the time as well, because they just innately understand their product, their tool so well that they forget a lot of key points for developers too. So if there can be somebody from outside the team and maybe somebody from outside the company who's a technical documentation specialist who can support the writing of the docs, that's the best way.
Right. Okay, and we've got this dotted line, and we briefly mentioned this, that this is kind of the developer experience, which is the docs, and it's the product experience. And one of the things that you say in the book is the most important part of converting engagement into adoption, the process often called onboarding. So it's making sure that this journey is really frictionless. And so I wondered, if you could share some ways that you talk about in the book about how this journey can be assessed, right, to make sure that it is as frictionless as possible.
Sure. Do you want to talk about that one, James, or shall I start?
Whichever's easier. Yeah.
Well, we do, and we support companies to doing what we call either a journey map or a friction log. So we'll have developers go in at a particular starting point and try and see if they can build something. So if they start at a place at Google, and maybe they're looking to find an API for a financial services API. And so if they type in financial services API, does your company come up? Does your tool come up? If it doesn't, and if you look at the journey map, the developer's not even going to get on the map. So how are you optimizing your SEO? That's big time friction, right there. Another thing we often see, especially in corporates, is they bury the developer program. So a developer, may find out what they're looking for and come to the home page of corporate, and then they're looking and going, oh, we're here to empower you to do, empower your financial banking. And so as a developer, I go, what the heck is this? And can I actually do anything with this? And, if they can't immediately see developers go here, or here's the tools, again, they drop off the journey, and, that's going to, then it's not going to bring them back. They're going to go and find it somewhere else. So there, those are just sort of some simple ways up front. And then when you get into the actual build, and, they're learning, they're building, they're doing something that's hands-on, and they run into a roadblock. And actually the roadblock might be, oh, they're asked to, well, I'm sorry, you can't try anything right now, or you can't actually look at our documentation until you fill out this big long form, and then we're going to come back to you in a week and tell you we've got you approved. Big time friction there. So, if you can get a developer to move through all those pieces as quickly as they can without that friction, it makes a big difference.
Yeah. I mean, other examples are things like, well, we've touched on inaccurate documentation, or the sandbox doesn't replicate the live environment, so you're testing things that then you can't implement. The classic is you have to contact someone to get an API key rather than it's automatically provisioned. All of these things that just slow the developer down and they start to lose their interest. I mean, unless they're being told to use a particular technology, or they've got, you know, a fan level excitement around using a new technology, you know, their patience is going to be pretty limited in terms of just how many of these hurdles they have to leap across before they give up and go somewhere else.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna also just ask you about, so we've talked about, you know, how much ground and territory they need to cover, and depending on the organization, they may or may not, you know, have responsibility or accountability for all those things. So of course you talk, as you need to in the book, about goal setting, corporate alignment, you know, getting in front of the right people and telling the right stories and making the right relationships. And this is, of course, true for anyone in any role that needs to do that. But again, for particular experiences that you guys have had, James, there's one story in the book that you talk about, and I wondered if you could just recount that for the attendees here today from your time at Bluvia.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people who have worked in large organizations would have had similar, you know, experiences, but you know, you quickly realize that to get a concept off the ground, especially in innovation, you know, a concept that might be, you know, non-core to the company you work in. We use a terminology called developer first and developer plus companies. So developer first companies are like inherently designed to build products or services for developers. You know, so the likes of Twilio's, the Stripes, you know, the kind of OAuths and all those kinds of people. Developer plus companies are doing something else than serve developers. So that might be Ford Motor Company, Santander Bank, might be a telco like a Telefonica, right? So, you know, it's not their core business. So the way they think about their business isn't through the lens of developers. They don't understand developers. They don't understand the metrics. But the most important thing is they're going to measure you by the things they understand, right? So that's where you get this clash. And obviously, they're not going to be as emotionally invested as you are. So you have to build a narrative and a structure that frames your idea, you know, in this context, launching a developer program, in language and things that they care about and they understand. So, you know, when I launched my first program, which was actually in O2, I actually had to frame it from the perspective of how O2's customers were going to benefit from this, not how developers were going to benefit from this, because they don't really understand or care how developers were going to benefit from it. So you have to kind of turn the story on its head and think about it from the kind of the customer's perspective, which, you know, obviously I was always coming at it from knowing the developer was the key person in this kind of exchange of value. But nonetheless, the only way that you get support in the organization was to frame it in the customer's perspective. And obviously you spend as much time as you do outside the company talking to the developer community to encourage them to take up your tools as you do internally, having this relentless conversation to engage and maintain the support of various stakeholders around the business. Because it's, you know, getting money to launch a program and getting the resources to launch a program is a trap, because you might achieve that after a lot of hard work. But, you know, within 12, 24 months, you start getting the questions as to like, so, you know, how much money are you making us? Or why are we still doing this thing? Or, you know, I've now got all of these competing projects coming in and hitting me saying, we need to do these things. So, you know, I need to balance diverting resources or budgets to other things, right? Because there's always a new shiny project just around the corner. And the example with Bluvia, you know, if you took Bluvia outside of Telefonica, you know, let's say before the days of Twilio, we were, by our second year, we had about, I don't know, I'm trying to remember now, 20,000 developers. We were making about $30 million in terms of revenue from the APIs we were serving. So, you know, if I was a standalone business and I was going to a VC and telling them this, I'd look attractive, right, in terms of a potential investment. It looked like we were getting traction. But inside Telefonica, $30 million is like change down the back of the sofa. So, and they don't care about the developer community necessarily. They don't care about the time it takes to build trust and to, nurture those relationships, because obviously you're really at the mercy of the developer's creativity in terms of using your tools to then make something that's then successful, right? It's a very different mindset. So, I was faced with some tough conversations, like, people kind of half joking, but being serious at the same time, going, well, we could make more money than your developer program by just shaving a penny off of SMS, right? Which kind of shows you why there's no innovation inside telcos and why ultimately they're dead. But, nonetheless, it's really depressing because, you put your passion into something and you have to go out into the external communities and represent the company and build the trust with the developer community. And that you're being inauthentic because behind the scenes, everything's kind of falling apart behind you. And it's such a difficult situation to be put into personally. It's just horrible, right? And I'm sure, developer advocates working in loads of companies have had this experience, even the alleged, kind of digital first companies like Google and Twitter have all had massive issues like maintaining trust with developers because they've deprecated APIs or gone back on promises to the developer community. So, I think another really an area that we don't talk about enough is just how out there developer advocates and developer relations professionals have to put themselves representing their companies when they're not fully in control of the situation they're in. It's a really tough part of the job.
Yeah, you're kind of
you can tell James is very passionate about this.
Yes. Well, and of course you do all this work with a group of people and then those people leave and then another group come in, which you talk about again in the book too. And you kind of have to start again. So it's this painting the fourth road bridge analogy where, you just really have to keep doing it.
Yeah, especially in large organizations, you've got a reorganization every 6 months. So not only have you got that commercial pressure to show how you're making money and why your program is more important than the next one, all of those people you spent a year convincing this was a great idea have now left. So, it's like, oh my God.
That's probably why they agreed. They were leaving. Yeah, sounds good. I've got to go.
It is exhausting, so luckily.
Those are some of the many reasons why we decided to put this book out there, because there were so many misconceptions about what developer relations is and what it should do and what all the component pieces are. So we really wanted the book to be that tool for somebody who either had to, was in those sort of issues and needed to sell the program and understand, have the tools to show and have the words to show why this is so important. And if you're starting a program, to be able to build it on a really solid.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we felt like that was the gap, because there's obviously other books about developer relations, right? So, we wanted to not only talk to developer relations professionals, but we also wanted them. We also wanted to talk to the business stakeholders, especially inside larger companies, who need to understand and just build empathy between the two groups. So, trying to avoid this situation as much as possible. So hopefully, if you work inside your large organization, this gives you the language to have those conversations, and you can just go drop that book on their desk and say, this is how we need to be doing it. And hopefully it gives you the tools and the techniques to try to empathize on both sides of that conversation, to defuse it so you don't get into that situation that I found myself in, where it's just a zero-sum game, right? It's you don't want to get there.
No, absolutely. Well, on that note, that's perfect sign off really to go out and get the book. And you've made these frameworks available on GitHub. And then I see Blake shared the URL there too for devrelbook.com. So great community practice in terms of sharing all these frameworks and helping others succeed. So I just want to give a chance to anyone that is attending here. Is there anyone that wants to ask a question of Carolyn and James? Because we are going to raffle a couple of these books to you. But if anyone wants to ask a question before we do that, please shout out now. We'd love to get you up on the stage here.
Yeah, so I'll jump in here. This is Blake again, running the event. So I was at KubeCon, so it's a big event for Kubernetes and Cloud Native. And so when we're talking about trends for next year, one of the biggest ones from a lot of the software companies is like, you know what, we've actually overlooked the developer experience, right? So we've got to, like, there's service mesh, there's all these technologies coming out, but developers like to work with, within workflows. And so you just saw this huge kind of sea change of talking about getting the developer experience right. So I was curious, for companies that are looking to start that journey, what are like one or two tips? I know you've got some of the frameworks, but what are those first two things that companies should do so they're not just saying, happy talk around that?
Get a copy of the book, follow the framework, get your developer experience in place before you start spewing all your marketing about how wonderful your products are. Get the foundations in place and have a team that can support the developers as well. We really need, those teams are really important to have in place as well.
I mean, it's a multifaceted answer, to be honest. I mean, you're going to have your analytics, or you should have your analytics to understand where in that journey developers are dropping out or hitting a roadblock. Don't skip the part of talking to your developers. A big part of DevRel is to act as that kind of information valve between the developer community back into your product and engineering teams. It's your job to go out and have the conversations either with your current users or potential users or your ex-users, right? So get out there into the community, have those conversations, understand and work with your support team to review support tickets, to understand where there's problems. And, all of the answers to the questions are at your fingertips. It's just opening your eyes and getting out there into the community and just applying them. Having the answer to the question is no good if you don't then go back and apply it. And again, that goes back to that conversation about the DevRel leader or the DevRel team needs to be able to influence product and engineering to make the changes necessary. There's no point just going back with a list, a laundry list of things we need to change if they never implement anything, right? So it's having that ability to influence and get stuff done inside the organization.
Great, thanks. And one of the other kind of interesting that I'll hear a lot about from different people outside the sort of bubble that we live in with developers is like how do you even do a developer community, right? They're all like introverts, right? Like this seems like an oxymoron, like developer communities, they don't like to talk to each other. And then on the same vector, I see a lot of teams get really frustrated, like with participation and engagement metrics, right? They're like, why aren't developers talking? And we're doing all this stuff, whether it's on a forum, a Slack, Discord, all this stuff. And it's like, well, they completely engage and interact in a different way, right? If you're trying to measure like a B2C audience and other stuff, so it's really like there's some education on other sides to really learn the audience and things like that. But I was just curious from your side, kind of, any points there in terms of the audience. While they are more introverted, they are extremely extroverted about the things they're passionate about. And secondly, for companies that have can't figure out how to measure developer engagement, right, within sort of a program, or whether it's like open source community or just within a product or a tool, like what are some of the ways, and that's a huge amount of stuff that we could potentially talk about, but what are some of the things they should do?
Well, I'll start, Caroline, and then maybe feel free to chip in. I think one of the key things is there's a lot of cliches when you talk about developers, right? So of course not. There's 25 million developers in the world, so 25 million introverts. I don't buy that for a second, right? So let's not just kind of play those kind of tired old cliches. However, they do value information over fluff. We've talked about, so the ability to be found quickly, to quickly understand what you're offering, why it's different, how they might implement it is going to be critical to adoption. Back to that friction, that developer journey. So understanding that as a difference in your audience is really, really important. And I think one of the golden rules that we always talk about is, to your point, Blake, about applying traditional marketing metrics to developers. The extension of that is never put a non-technical person in front of a developer. I think the mistake we see time and time again is marketing teams being sent to developer events and trying to have a meaningful conversation with developers. It's just, don't do it. Just don't do it, because it undermines the credibility, right? You need your developer relations team needs to, obviously as you scale, you're gonna hire more diverse roles that might be non-technical, as you scale your team. But for your advocacy side of the business and your documentation writers, they have to understand the technology.
Have anything to add on there? Just one thing. I used to run developer events, and because we crafted them the right way and we had the right people there and the right type of information that we had, it wasn't a quiet room. It really wasn't a quiet room.
Excellent. That's some great insight. Should we get to the giveaways, Jamie?
Yeah, let's do it. We've got a couple of minutes.
How many books are we giving away?
We have 2 books to give away.
Okay, and you're not giving away your sofa this time?
Giving away myself?
Your
not
sofa.
yet. Oh, my sofa. No, I'm my stuff's all in storage. I could probably just give away the whole storage container, to be honest. Yeah. I haven't seen it in months.
So we don't give away Jamie's sofa, maybe the next time. All right, so we'll go to Wheel of Names. I'll just do it really quickly. I think we've got everybody here. We're giving away 2 books, and so I'm just going to spin it. You'll probably hear it. I don't want to. So it is spinning.
He's actually got a roulette wheel there. He's.
All right, our first winner of this new book, which everybody should get, is Dana. Dana, you're the winner.
Congrats.
Jamie will be reaching out to you, and if he needs to give away some stuff in storage, definitely hit him up. So
you might get a sofa with your book.
You might get a sofa. It might be a little bit bigger. All right, and then so we'll go on to our second and final book winner. Thanks for being here.
It's not a new sofa. It's very old.
All right, our second and final book winner is Vera, V-E-R to the A. Congratulations.
Nice. Congrats. All right, so you will be getting a copy of this book. Blake should have your contact details from the event, so we'll reach out to you by email. So congrats, Dana and Vera. And yeah, go and get the book for those that weren't lucky to win it today. All available now. Good bookshops, Amazon, everywhere that you would expect. Thanks so much, James and Carolyn, for your time and your insight and for all the work you've done making a book. Making a book is hard work, people. So thank you so much for doing this and contributing to the community and the DevRel world. Really appreciate it and appreciate your time today.
Thanks, everyone.
And thanks, everyone, for attending. Great for you to come along. And there'll be plenty more CMX Connect events and more book clubs to come. Keep an eye on the events page. Thanks, everyone. See you all soon.
Bye.
Bye.